the idea here is that the tidings from the east and the north come from this group of people who know what's going on and are all excited that someone's being made king. I wonder who that group of people was supposed to be for the second coming. They're supposed to be excited about someone becoming king, and they start running around the world all excited, telling people that Jesus has become king, the king is coming, the king is coming, or he has become king, he's become king. Yeah, that's supposed to be the Elijah messenger. That's supposed to be us. So when she looks, she sees the king standing by the pillar as the manner, and the princes and the trumpeters by the king, and all the people of the land rejoice. So you'll notice there's the three groups. And initially, there's the guards, right? The guards, the 144,000 that we mentioned. And then, of course, you see the trumpeters are mentioned, and then you see the people of the land. So you see this threefold process of this proclamation that goes out. It starts in the house of God with those who know what's going on in the house of God. And then at the revelation of the king, it goes out with loud trumpets or a loud cry. It goes out to all the people of the land, and they hear that he's become king. And by the way, the Sabbath that it's mentioning here, this Sabbath, even if it's on Saturday, doesn't matter. This is a Feast of Tabernacles because this is when the king is coronated. The celebration of the king happens on the Feast of Tabernacles. And this is why it talks about the house and the trumpeters and all the people rejoicing with great trumpets, because this is the Feast of Tabernacles and the proclamation is going forward. So notice it says it starts with the trumpeters are blowing trumpets and people rejoicing. They blow with trumpets. By the way, why does it keep telling us that? Then Athaliah rents her clothes and cries treason, treason, right? Of course, this is her last ditch effort to save herself, right?
Mm-hmm.
By the way, this is what's going on in Revelation 17 and Revelation 13. Those the actions of Satan and his kingdom are the last ditch effort for them to save themselves because they know what's coming. So many times we look at the prophecies as if Satan is winning, and from our earthly perspective, it can seem like Satan's winning, but the truth is that he's desperate. That's why there's a time of trouble, and his actions are erratic because he's trying to save himself. But there's nothing that he can do to fight against the king. So he knows he's going to lose, even though he's trying to kill God's people the same way Athaliah here is killing all her grandchildren because they're in the kingly line. So Jehoiada the priest commanded the captains of the hundreds, the officers of the host, and said to them, have her forth without the ranges, and him that follows her kill with the sword. By the way, this reminds us of, remember when Moses came down the mountain and the children of Israel are worshiping the golden calf, and he calls the tribe of Levi to him, right? And then he tells them, and by the way, he calls them to the gate. If you read Mrs. White clearly and also the Bible clearly, he calls the Levites to himself and they stand at the gate. And then he tells them to get their sword, strap their sword, and then go throughout the camp of Israel and slay those who are worshiping the golden calf, right? So this is the same imagery here. Here you have the 144,000, if you would, by to use the imagery, and they have this sword. They're strapped to the sword, and they're supposed to bring Athaliah out, and any who follow her, they're supposed to kill. There's a couple stories like this in the Old Testament where they set kind of a ruse, and those who worship the false king, they act like they're following the king, and then when they follow that false king, then they're killed with a sword. So he says. For the priest had said, let her not be slain in the house of the Lord. So they laid hands on her. She went by the way by the which the horses came into the king's house, and there she was slain. Very interesting about the king's horses. I don't know if you've heard anything about the seals, and at the coronation there's some horses. But yeah, there's a connection here. So then verse 17 is a real important part. So he says Jehoiada made a covenant, and he makes a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people, that they should be the Lord's people, and between the king and also the people. So why is it restating what it said in verse at the end of verse 17? Why is it restating that? So this is actually a three-way covenant, right? So this is not just he's saying there's a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people. And in case we don't catch it, it restates it so you catch it. So there's a covenant made between the Lord and the king. There's a covenant made between the king and the people, and there's a covenant made between the Lord and the king and the people, or the king, Lord and the people. Does that make sense?
Mm.
So the idea this is a marriage, this is a wedding, and when they accept when they accept this Joash as king, they're accepting God as their God. To reject Joash as their king is to reject God as their God. So the covenant is made between God and the king, and between the king and the people, and therefore the covenant is made between God and the people. It's a three-way covenant. And what happens when this covenant is made? What happens in verse 18?
They went and took down the altars of Baal.
Right. So the idea here is there's a cleansing of the temple, right?
Mm.
Of anything, there's a cleansing of the kingdom of anything that's not in harmony with the principles of the king. It's the same idea as when they take the oath that they're supposed to be cleansing themselves from anything that's not in harmony with the principles of the king. So there's a cleansing. And so this image, I don't know if you know anything about image in Revelation 13, we call it the image of the beast, but here there's images, and these images are broken down and they're broken to pieces and they're destroyed and they're thrown out. And then, of course, along with the image are the false priests who exalt those false images are also slain, right? And they're slain with Athaliah. She is slain. So the harlot queen is slain, the false priests are slain, and the image of the beast that they erect to try to take dominion is also destroyed. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So he took the rulers of the hundreds and the captains of the guard and all the people of the land, and they brought down the king from the house of the Lord and came by the way of the gate of the guard of the king's house, and he sat on the throne of the king. And all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet. And they slew Athaliah with a sword beside the king's house. 7 years old was Joash when he began to reign. So this scene in history is actually becomes a type or a prophecy of the great conflict over who's the rightful king, and this idea of a usurper trying to take the throne and then using that power to oppress God's people and to destroy God's people, literally, because she killed the king's sons. And then how God is going to preserve this seed, and this seed is going to grow, and then at the right time, the seed is going to be revealed to God's people, and it's going to save God's people from sin and destruction from this evil kingdom that's trying to oppress them. And God is going to make things whole, or restore life to His people through this king. And there's going to be a cleansing of the people and a cleansing of the land. God's going to make a covenant, and they're going to rejoice, and there's going to be life throughout the kingdom.
So why did they change Joash's name?
Because when you're born or reborn, you're supposed to receive a new name,
Right.
Why
right?
didn't that happen with David and Solomon, though?
What's that?
Why didn't that happen with David or Solomon?
Well, I think that you can find examples where it doesn't happen, I guess. But the truth is that there's enough examples that we see where it does happen that helps us make sense. The idea actually is not so much it's not so much the new name or as a new heart, but so the idea here is that remember when Saul was anointed as king, remember the story?
Mm-hmm.
So Saul's name stays Saul, but he begins to prophesy, and they say is Saul among the prophets? He was given a new heart, but of course
Yeah.
Saul does not nurture that, right? So he doesn't become he doesn't he falls back into his old way. But so
Yeah.
the idea, the imagery, by the way, is that the idea of a new name is a rebirth. So Abraham becomes Abraham, Jacob becomes Israel, or um, the whole idea of Simon becomes Peter, or Saul becomes Paul.
Right.
This idea of the change of the name, and
And character.
yeah,
With Saul, it said he was changed into another man.
that's right. That's what he literally says.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the idea here is that's a birth. So that's why there's a change of the name. You'll notice the same thing happens to, for example, it happens to when Jeroboam is made king, not Jeroboam, Jehoiakim is made king. His he has a new name, and then when he's made king by Egypt, then the king gives him a new name. The Egypt gives him a new name. This is common Old Testament idea. Remember when Daniel and his friends,
Mhm.
Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, are
Mhm.
taken by King Nebuchadnezzar? Well, they're given a new name because they're supposed to be serving a different God, a different king. So they're, Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right? They're given new names. So this change of the name is just common Old Testament imagery to describe the idea of becoming a new person. It's the same thing. Remember in Revelation, it talks about when you go to heaven, you're going to be given a white stone,
But
and
in
on
that,
the stone is going to be a new name, which only you and God know.
It's kind of neat, isn't it?
Yeah. So it shows a personal intimacy with God
Mhm.
that nobody else can have.
Yes.
is the new name then like a prophecy of who you're going to become?
Yes, it's a description of your essence, but it's also something that we're going to grow into, right? So this process of this coronation of the king is very important, and of course, this is where it's a very clear portion of scripture where you see the three emblems that are given to the king at his coronation. And the three emblems are the crown and the aduth, the testimony, the scroll, and then he's anointed with the oil. And by the way, every one of those emblems come from within and then they're brought out. So the whole idea of the crown is the idea of the shafts of light, the crown, the corona, the shafts of light. They're shining from the king because he's the source of light. He's the son of righteousness who rises with healing in his beams. That's Malachi, right? And his beams, the beams of light that shine from him, actually give life. That's what the crown symbolizes. And then, of course, the aduth, the testimony, also comes from within the most holy place, the ark, and is given to the king. That's the scroll, the book of Deuteronomy that we looked at last week or the week before. And then, of course, a horn of oil is brought out of the temple, and then he's anointed with that horn of oil at the porch. So that's why the Messiah, the anointed one, is called the horn, because the oil that's used to anoint him comes from this horn. And those three elements together are the three parts to the coronation of the king. So these are the elements that you're going to see in the book of Revelation. So you see the
Yeah.
scroll, and you can think of the seals, and then you see the trumpets, and you see the thirds. And by the way, that's connected to the numbered group, the 144,000, same as Revelation. And then, of course, when you see the priests of Baal and Athaliah, and the images broke down, then you're dealing with the outer court and the plagues. So you can see here in type or in miniature, the whole book of Revelation is actually being explained to you in one chapter in 21 verses of the Old Testament. And I think that's just so cool.